engines!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. You can see him, but he talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweater working for the man, alright. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Cool-headed when the heat is on, yeah. Save me, baby, from the burning building. Take all the blue sleepless sun, alright.
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you, he rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Good evening, race fans. Welcome to the Hoobazoo Radio Network and welcome to Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we talk about the weekend racing or non-racing, as the case may be. Joining me in the studio, Seth, Eggert, Richard Youden, and Louise Torres. Fellas, how we doing tonight?
Doing well.
Good, thank you.
Good to be back with a much better mic than 2 years ago.
Yeah, you sound good, man. It's good to have you back on, Louise. So, again, there's more schedule news, more cancellations, and more iRacing and e-racing, and there seem to be more and more of this. But interesting story I read. Bubba Wallace had a real-world sponsor drop him over a tirade in the iRacing game, or he got mad and quit the race or whatnot. So Seth, you wanna shed some light on that, because I think that's kind of funny. While we're just simulating racing here, we have real world consequences.
Well, the Food City Showdown was this past weekend. The NASCAR iRacing Pro Invitational was at the virtual Bristol Motor Speedway, and in Bubba's defense, you could tell that there were a handful of drivers that were not taking this event seriously. Granted, it's meant to be entertainment in one sense, but at the same time, you have drivers like Bubba, drivers like Landon Castle, Dale Jr., Garrett Smithley putting hours upon hours of practice and testing to actually get good in this. Then you have drivers like Clint Boyer going and laughing about wrecking Bubba in the race. 9 laps in, and in one wreck, Bubba received 12 incident points, which iRacing delves out incident points based on whether you spin, that's 2. If you hit the wall, that's 2. And if you hit another car, it ranges from 0 to 2 to 4, depending on how hard you hit the car. Essentially, it caused enough damage that Bubba got pissed off, stopped the car, and left the session. His sponsor, Blue Emu, which has sponsored Richard Petty Motorsports for 15 years, abruptly decided to drop Bubba and drop RPM after that incident. They are also sponsoring Landon Castle, who drives for Morgan Shepherd and Shepherd Racing Ventures, and they desperately need a sponsor. So it should be interesting to see how that turns out.
Yeah, for sure. So now at the end of the day, it was it young William Byron that won this race? Am I correct?
Yes, William Byron won after dominating the race. He led 116 laps of the 150. John Hunter Nemechek finished second, Timmy Hill third, Denny Hamlin fourth, and Matty Benedetto fifth. Of those 5 drivers, 4 of them are veterans on iRacing: Byron, Nemechek, Hill, and Hamlin. Matt DiBenedetto is relatively new, but he's actually been putting time and effort into practicing and learning iRacing. Then you have some other drivers like Michael McDowell going back to this incident points system that iRacing has. In a normal race, if you get 17 or more, you get a drive-through penalty. If you get 24 or
in
more,
a real race, your car is banged up.
well, I'm talking the official iRacing races that actually count for points and essentially that people are paying for it to run.
Right. Now, is there prize money at stake on this stuff that NASCAR's doing, these pro invitationals? Because I did notice this past one was it was not on Fox Sports 1, but it was on straight up Fox. It was on network TV. So there's some money behind that. So is there actual prize money for the participants in this right now, or is that kind of unknown to us, the public?
For the Pro Invitational, no. For the eNASCAR Coca-Cola iRacing series, that's the one that runs on every other Tuesday. That's streamed live on Twitch, on Facebook, and on YouTube. In that one, there is a $300,000 prize at the end of the season, and at the big events throughout the season. So the season opener at Daytona, what would be their version of the Coke 600, what would be their version of the Southern 500. There are prize money in those races. Interesting.
Now, have there been some of these technical glitches on these NASCAR ones? I know that the IndyCar's first one there, they had a couple of glitches. I want to say Hinchcliffe had problems with his internet or whatever and got booted off, or have there been any incidents like that in any of these other ones?
Well, in this one that just happened this past weekend, Eric Jones, his internet essentially dropped him out of the session 14 laps into the race, and he was never able to get back into the race. So,
okay, so these are all kind of new kind of situations that we're not used to. You going through the finishing order, reading the box score, and it's this reason somebody dropped out, no internet. So
Tony Kanaan in the IndyCar challenge this past weekend actually had a different issue. When he pitted for the second time, there was a glitch on iRacing's and that it wouldn't drop him off the hydraulic jacks. So no matter what he did, he couldn't leave the pit stall.
Oh, well, that's a bummer. So, all right, so let's talk about some real world stuff or some non-virtual stuff. So, IndyCar has released a revised schedule where they've added a couple of double headers. They've turned the Iowa race into a double header. They've turned the Laguna Seca race into a doubleheader. They dropped Detroit. Detroit's not going to happen now. The season, if all goes well with the virus and the flattening the curve and the stay-at-home orders here and there, the season is slated to begin in Texas now, which is in early June. Whether or not that happens is remains to be seen. But and then they've added another race at the Indianapolis Road Course in October, which is the same weekend that the Speedway will be hosting the 8-hour endurance race. So they're trying to salvage a season and have enough races in there to have a meaningful championship. So provided there are no more cancellations, it looks pretty decent on paper anyway. So Louise, you follow IndyCar quite closely. What are your thoughts on the new revised IndyCar schedule?
Personally, the revised schedule, I think, is more cheaper. I totally understand why they would put Iowa, a third Indianapolis date, and Laguna on there to kind of make it a championship, make it more intense, just to kind of like build some anticipation. Because while Detroit, which is one of Penske's big races, considering where it's from, and also Chevrolet's most important race, a street course is just very difficult to maintain a race day. Look what happened to Long Beach. I wish St. Petersburg the best. They're going to try whatever it takes to make that the championship finale whenever the time will be. But honestly,
yeah, looks like they're talking mid-October on that one. But again, it remains to be seen. Although in October the weather is still decently pleasant in St. Petersburg for sure.
Yeah. And as far, man, I was talking the third Indianapolis date. I think it's a good way to build that harvest weekend that they're having, the Harvest Grand Prix, because they're going to have like the 8-hour sport car event, and there's a decent chance that IMSA could be in there. So it's a worth your dollar to go to it. Sure, it's going to make logistics like my schedule a little bit more complex to decide if I'm going to do all 3 Indianapolis races or just the Brickyard and the 500. I think in this difficult circumstance that they're doing a phenomenal job trying to accommodate with everyone as possible. But for now, if Texas stays as the season opener, you're talking about a big one with the aero screen on an oval. You're going to create some buzz because let's face it, as long as Detroit has been here, it's produced some good races. But when you look at Texas as the possible season opener compared to another potential season opener in Formula One, it's a 9-day difference. You're going to have some unpredictability now. I think that could bring a lot of eyeballs to follow the IndyCar campaign.
Certainly, yeah. And then the whole thing you've got some. We got a really nice rookie crop this year, and imagine their first time in competition at Texas. You know what I mean? Texas can be a real nail biter. And these guys are first race, so it'll be interesting to see again. I'm only cautiously optimistic that everything in the world will be fine enough by early June to have a race in Texas. But I mean, if they pull it off, it'll be interesting. So now, yes, Seth.
You were going to come to me about NASCAR, I take it?
Yes, because Martinsville is still on the books, I believe.
At
right?
the
It's
moment,
not been
there's
canceled yet, but I do know I've got family that lives in Virginia, and I think that
they have
their stay-at-home order extends past the date.
It extends it to June 10th, I believe.
Right.
Yep.
There are 4 contingency plans I've heard as of right now. NASCAR hasn't explicitly said what they're doing as of yet. One plan would be to restart the season at Martinsville. Another plan would be to start continue, I guess would be the better wording, at the Coke 600. Another one would be having a doubleheader with IndyCar continuing the season starting at Texas. And then there was a 4th one, which I believe it said 15-week delay, essentially. And I believe restarting the season at Sonoma, which would cause the season to end in December.
So they would, what are they going to attack races on the end that were dropped off in the beginning? Is that their plan?
It depends on which plan they go with. If they go with the first 2 plans, you would have doubleheaders more likely at Dover and Michigan. You would have midweek races at Kentucky, at Atlanta, at Homestead, and a couple of other tracks. And then you would have a few tracks actually move from where their current date is, like Kentucky, to a different date for logistical reasons. If they go with the latter 2 options, which is start doing a doubleheader with IndyCar at Texas, or continuing the season at Sonoma, they would tack on the races at the end of the year.
It's almost as if, everyone was against the NASCAR IndyCar double header, right? And we've already kind of got one with the Brickyard scheduled, and now we're looking at having another possible one there. It just seemed like, just the current climate in the world with everything that everyone's trying to work around is just about, we're just about having to force the issue there. And it's kind of nice to see that coming from both sides. There's some agreement that they can make this work, because everyone for years has had every reason why it won't work, and now we're going to find out if it will or that it will.
Not to mention another one that's going to be interesting is Iowa, because IndyCar is turning that into a doubleheader. So you're going to have the IndyCar race on Saturday, on Saturday, followed
Friday
by
and Saturday.
You're right. On Friday, with the ARCA race Friday night and the IndyCar race Saturday night, And then you might also have to have a doubleheader there with the Xfinity Series because their first date might get postponed as well.
Let's be interesting how much racing we're going to have come. Once we reset the Earth
and
go back to
another
normal, we'll have the racing going to be so compacted.
and another one that I'm going to throw out there that might end up being interesting as well is Mid-Ohio, because right now Xfinity and ARCA are scheduled to be there after the Coke 600. If NASCAR has to delay until Texas, those races are going to get postponed, and they might also have to be put with IndyCar later in the year.
That will be interesting, yeah. So now, Richard, Formula One, the latest cancellation was Canada.
Correct, yeah.
So that leaves, if nothing else is canceled,
Paul Ricard.
Paul Ricard as the perhaps the season opener.
Yep. Paul Ricard is the first race, which is a great place to start.
Oh God, that track gives me headache just looking at it. So
yeah, snooze fest, I think is the.
Yeah. Louise is saying that Xfinity's at Loudon on the 18th of July, so Xfinity won't be with the Indy cars at Iowa.
Unless they completely rework the schedule, which is one of the things they might end up doing.
I think there's going to be a lot of schedule reworking. So now, Richard, are there any plans to add back any of the missing Formula One races, or?
I don't know what yeah, I mean, they keep talking about them. I really don't know. It's trying to shuffle it all in. When they were missing a couple, they're like, yeah, okay. But Monaco and Australia have definitely been cancelled. So we're down to 20 races or whatever it would be now. But, they're taking a hit, that's for sure.
And they've announced also Le Mans is canceled till next year.
Yeah.
Yep. So that was the next one. That's in July. So that's in France in July. So they're folks in France are feeling like they're not going to be ready to race in July. So, and that's going to.
Well, I think
put the French Grand Prix at risk.
I think probably organising the French Grand Prix is slightly easier than Le Mans. Le Mans is quite an undertaking. So I wouldn't read too much into that.
Would it have to do because of the driver schedules with Le Mans being?
Yeah, I think it would be driver schedules, a little bit of the logistics, because they would probably start getting set up in May, if not early June.
For Le Mans, yeah. And there's all the testing and all the, there's so many. Yeah, I mean, Le Mans is a huge undertaking.
So just based on all of that, the driver schedules, the various teams that normally would be running, whether it's IMSA, WEC, European Le Mans, etc. Between all of that, there's some that might not even be able to make it there, depending on what the situation in their home country.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think the international. I want to say that Formula One, as well as the WEC, is in a different bit of a situation than some of the United States-based series when you talk about all the international travel. And certainly there are places in the world that are hit a lot harder with this virus than we are in the States. There's places in Europe that are just devastated. Now, Italy is really having a high death toll and whatnot, and having a lot of issues there.
As is Spain, yeah.
And Spain, yeah. So when was the last time Le Mans was canceled?
Oh, good grief!
Or postponed?
I think World War II.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of.
Interestingly enough, I was watching the program the other night, and I was telling you about this. It's called The Racing Years. I was watching that, and evidently Le Mans was postponed.
It 55? 55?
Well, Le Mans, 55 is when they had the accident, right?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, that
so
was
56.
So 1969, Le Mans was postponed until September because of student uprisings on campuses. They said.
It's understandable.
Yeah, it's just interesting. Yeah, because that's the late 60s were a bit of a tumultuous time as well for a lot of folks. But I had just. It's happened. I was watching that program that chronicles European racing year by year, and I was watching the episode on 1969, and they'd mentioned that Le Mans was pushed to September, and something I didn't know. So because I was 2 at the time and I didn't remember.
Oh, come on, get your jeez. Seth would have remembered. Seth would have remembered.
I would
Seth-
not remember, but I would have
Seth-
learned about.
Yeah, Seth's like Pepperidge Farm. Pepperidge Farm, remembers? So,
No, no,
oh,
no.
so
that's-
Richard, let's talk about the financial side of Formula One. There's some talk that there, as many as 4 of the teams may just have to fold and go out of business if they don't start racing soon.
You'd like to think that the governing body would step in and make sure it doesn't happen, whether that's by releasing some of the prize money a little bit early. I know they've done that in the past to a number of teams. Especially when Bernie was in charge and some of the good old boys, some of the the older teams would say, hey, Bernie, and end of the year, middle of the year, said, hey, look, can we have some of our prize money just a little bit early? Things are a little bit ropey right now, and Bernie dip his hand in his pockets and give them a little bit of a bailout. So maybe slightly different setup these days with Liberty running the place, but I'm pretty certain that they will do everything they can to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, well, certainly with a lot of stuff shut down, there are, a lot of businesses that are not going to survive this, and it's not out of the question to think that a race team, which is also a business, we may
at the end of the day,
lose a few, certainly. And, I don't know how all of it works, because a lot of it is hush hush, but that for the most part, sponsors make payments. You don't just say, here's my $2.5 million, but usually those sponsors pay in installments. So I guess that if they don't race, they don't have to pay. And I'm
it
sure
depends on the contract.
It depends on the contract, but I'm sure some of the smaller teams, and across the board, not just Formula One, but the IndyCar teams and NASCAR as well, that these sponsor commitments are hinged, or hinged on the fact that they're racing at a racetrack, and if they're not racing at a racetrack, so therefore you've got where you spent money for your car this year and pre-season testing and these sort of things, and now you don't have any income coming in. You've still got folks to pay. You can cut their salaries or furlough them, or have those folks collect unemployment. There's a lot of different things happening here and there, but there are businesses. I just heard the other day there's a restaurant chain it's a smaller one. It's like 250 stores. Logan's Roadhouse, 260 stores, are closing all their stores because they know they're not going to make it through the shutdown. So it's not out of the realm possibility that we may have smaller grids once things get back to normal. So now, Louise, Seth, you hearing anything out of NASCAR? Any teams that are just struggling might not make it? No, nobody.
I know some teams have furloughed their staff.
Well, most of the teams have furloughed their staff, but the problem in the Cup Series is with the charter agreement. If you own a charter, you have to run, regardless of whether you have a sponsor, regardless of whether or not you're struggling financially. If you don't run, NASCAR will pull your charter, as it stands right now. That doesn't mean that NASCAR will make any. They could make exceptions with it being extraordinary circumstances. That being said, for the Xfinity and for the truck teams, honestly, I'd say it's hit and miss. There's some that are making it that at least looks like they're going to be okay. Jordan Anderson is one of them. Austin Wayne himself is one of them. And then there's some that, honestly, you won't know until after everything is said and done, like maybe a Mike Harmon or a JD Motorsports. It's honestly up in the air from team to team.
Yeah, like Sam Hunt Racing decided to temporarily shut down. Carl Longs are, from what I understood, they're paying their people quite a bit. And also, there's instances where a lot of people are taking pay cuts. I was going to bring that up shortly when you asked that question. Pay cuts is also happening. Like, I know the CEO of Formula One have also taken pay cuts. Penske and also are taking a lot of that as well. So it's a lot of variations from time to time.
NASCAR announced pay cuts. Also, one team that I know that is still, staying the course right now is Timmy Hill's truck team, Hill Motorsports. He is insisting on paying his employees. Granted, he only has one employee outside of himself, but he is insisting.
I was gonna say, isn't he just paying that guy and just beer and sandwiches anyway?
No, he's actually paying him. He's actually paying him. And mind you, Timmy is not making any money. Even doing the iRacing stuff, he's not making any money. So he is trying to figure out how to make it work and how to keep his employee above water, let alone himself.
Yeah. So speaking of iRacing, since you brought it up, we forgot to mention the big news, the big crossover news. We already had Jimmy Johnson try out the IndyCar. And now we're going to have Dale Jr., one of the best, most well-known personalities in all of racing, join the IndyCar guys at Michigan for the iRace. Now, Louise, you were just very recently doing some research, watching old Michigan IndyCar races. So, man, what are your thoughts of Dale Jr. jumping in the ring here?
I think for a track like Michigan, which IndyCar hasn't run since 2007, having the most popular driver and now NASCAR Hall of Fame nominee, Dale Earnhardt Jr. in this, I think it'll bring some eyeballs. It'll get that tremendous crossover that we know it's just not that can only happen in iRacing. So having him in there along with Jimmy Johnson, it brings some tremendous crossover because Michigan International Speedway or Michigan Speedway, depending on how you want to call it, depending on the time period, produced, quite frankly, some of the best racing out there and during the IRL/kart days, no matter what it was. Through the Hanford device days, it's just unpredictable. You will expect some tight packs, some intense wheel-to-wheel action. Refer to the Fontana 2015 race, you may get something like it. But the difference is with the 2015 cars, the DW12s, and to the current one, you have the aero screen. That's going to bring some unpredictable nature and also get some of those IndyCar regulars some experience how it is, because Will Power talked about in the teleconference last Saturday, besides the whole communication ban that he had for saying stuff to Scott Dixon and Connor Daly, that you get some of that aero screen feel with the iRacing. Of course, Power has done it both virtual and in real life when they first introduced it last year. So who knows what kind of tight racing we're going to have, especially with those aero screens and the current car that we have.
I don't know that I think that the aero screen is a big deal in iRacing. I mean, at the end of the day, you're sitting in open air in front of a couple of computer monitors. You're not really in the aero screen. You're not looking through the screen other than whatever image is generated on the computer. So I don't buy that, Louise.
And if I may, I actually have a lot of experience running the IndyCar at Michigan, because back when I was writing for iRacing News, covering the IndyCar series that they had, I was a regular in the IndyCar series. And one of my best tracks was Michigan. It is a drafting track, a lot, like how it was in real life. But on top of that, they are going to have to be very careful exiting turn 4 in particular, because the car on iRacing at least is known to break loose exiting turn 4. There's been quite a few times where I thought I had a race in the bag, and next thing I know, I'm spinning down pit lane. So
yeah, it'll be fun to watch for sure. And there's a lot of folks like, to your point, Louise, that would love to have Indy cars for real back in Michigan. There's a couple tracks that are always mentioned when people start talking about, bring back Milwaukee, bring back Michigan, bring back Fontana, bring back Cleveland. But Michigan is always right up there at the top of the list, and it did produce some really, really memorable races over the years.
Yeah, and you do have a point as far as the aero screen. I think I had to double check real quick. I think what Power was implying is how like the rubber and all that stuff goes through the screen. But yeah, you do have a point. There's a difference from virtual and obviously real life. So what we see on Saturday could be a lot different if the time comes they come back to a track like Michigan.
Certainly. So now, Richard, are we Formula One still iRacing? I know the first one was a bit of a flop.
They're using their console game still, but
they're using F1 2019. I think they did have a race in Australia. I think it was.
Yep, they had one.
Charles Leclerc won. George Russell got on the podium there. Yeah, it's still a little bit of a
Yeah, they got a bit of ways to go on that regard. I think the big takeaway that I got was Charles and Arthur Leclerc having a really positive showing in that one. And I think it was so sudden as well because I think what was it, like 2 days before the race actually happened, that ESPN2 was confirmed they're going to air that. It was following the NASCAR race. And after watching that Bristol ordeal, tuning into that one was quite interesting because you pretty much got the in-game graphics. And of course, some of the drivers do simulating events through the Codemasters game. But it's kind of, they gotta have to polish it up a little bit because it seems like they just scramble desperately trying to put something on.
Yeah, it's just very bitty and clunky, isn't it? It's not slick. It's not a nice, neat product like it needs to be for Formula One. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they just don't say, you know what, we're going to scrap this because it's all a little bit. We need to get our ducks in a row before we put.
Maybe they could just have the F1 guys play Mario Kart. You know.
Yeah, I mean,
that's pretty fun.
Yeah. I mean, the little. Yeah.
Well, some of the F1 drivers like Max. Are actually on iRacing running the sports cars in the IMSA deal that they have on iRacing because they actually prefer that compared to the F1 console game. So you have some that just are not even interested in participating over on the F1 side right now.
Yeah. So, all right, guys. Well, we've got about a half an hour left, and I think we've used up most of all the racing news, but now one of you guys did allude to that. The NASCAR Hall of Fame nominees were announced. We had mentioned Dale Jr. is there. This is his first time on the ballot. I do know, is it Carl Edwards is on there as well, yes. I heard? And who are the other nominees, Seth?
The other nominees, and mind you, they have it broken down into modern era and pioneer era. Essentially, you have everyone from 1961 to the present in the modern era, according to the way they're doing it. And that would be 2 from there. They have 1 coming from the Pioneer ballot, which that's from the start of NASCAR to 1960. From the modern era, they have Neil Bonnet, Jeff Burton, Dale Jr. and Carl Edwards, as we said, Harry Gant, Harry Hyde, Larry Phillips, Ricky Rudd, Kirk Shelmerdine, and Mike Stefanik. From the Pioneer era, they have Jake Elder, Red Farmer, Banjo Matthews, Herschel McGriff, and Ralph Moody. They also have the Landmark Award, which they announced. Usually they announce it later, but they've already announced who the nominees are for that. Janet Guthrie has returned to that ballot. You also have Alvin Hawkins, who was NASCAR's first flagman. You have Mike Helton, Dr. Joseph Mattioli, the founder of Pocono Raceway, and Ralph Seagraves, who was the executive that helped the NASCAR Winston partnership.
Yeah, you got a lot of really familiar names out there. Like when you said Red Farmer, I'm surprised he's not already in the Hall of Fame. He was early on in NASCAR. He was considered one of the greatest race car drivers in the world.
Yeah,
you know
he
I mean?
has.
He was that dude was really good in his day, and for what he was doing, he was like NASCAR's first superstar. And I'm surprised he's not in the Hall already.
Yeah, he has 4 championships, 3 in the late model sportsman, which slowly evolved into what's now the Xfinity Series, and the 1956 modified championship. If that tells you when he started. And he is still racing today, believe it or not. Granted, it's more...
How old is he?
Good question, because some say he's in his 80s, some say he's in his 70s. I'm honestly not sure off the top of my head. But
you figure he's got to at least be in his 70s.
But he is known as the ageless Red Farmer, and the running joke is we don't know when he was born because of how long he's been racing.
That's interesting, yeah. So I didn't even realize he was still alive. So I have to tell you, but now some of these other names that you brought up, there's some names on there I really like. Harry Gant, I always had a heck of a lot of respect for that guy. I thought he was not only a very good driver, but I always thought he was as a personality and as a person. I thought he was very approachable. You know, I had met him at one point in time. What they used to call him, the gentleman.
Handsome Harry.
Handsome Harry, that's what they called him. Yeah, but I think as a personality, he was older than a lot of his contemporaries. I want to say he was in his 50s, raced against guys in their 30s and whatnot.
Yes, and
remember there was that season in the middle 90s where he
Mr. September.
Yeah, he won like 4 races in a row, and I was at the one race, and it was in Martinsville, where he had crashed pretty hard, and they said, you know, oh, that's gonna end Harry Gant's streak right here. Oh, he won't be winning again, and you know, with some hammering and some duct tape, some creative engineering later, he ends up winning that race, missing the whole hood of the car and stuff. So it was just a neat moment to be there and to witness. So
I have to actually mention that race because, and what you said, he swept that whole month of September. The reason why he swept that month, he and his crew chief at the time, they figured out how to stagger the rear tires, which most teams were not doing, if any, at that time. And that provided enough grip for him to basically have an advantage over the entire field. And that wreck at Martinsville, even though, yes, it was mainly the front end that was damaged, it damaged the rear end just enough that it pulled back some sheet metal for teams to actually notice the staggered rear tires.
Aha! So it gave away the secret, huh?
Yes.
But either way, you got to hand it to that crew on that day, because I want to say that they pitted on like 5 consecutive laps, right? They're all under yellow, but they would they go and do a little work and then send them back out to catch the tail end of the field to keep them on the lead lap. Because you know as well as I do how easy it is to go a lap down in Martinsville. The track's only a half mile around, so they do a little bit of work, send them back out, and come back in, and they kept him on that lead lap and won the race. Well,
to be fair, that was, when was that in the 90s? Early 90s? Or
93 or 94, I want to say.
The 4-peat, he swept September?
Yes.
That was 91, and with Andy Petrie as the crew chief.
91, okay.
I don't know if they had a pit road speed limit at that time. Because
that was the year that they had the implemented the whole sticker rule before the speed limit, because 1990 was when you had the pit accidents at Talladega and Atlanta.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if that was it. So that was probably when they had that sticker rule, as Louise put it, or they had just started implementing the pit road speed limit. So depending on when that race was and with the rules, they might have been able to exploit it to stay on the lead lap as well.
Yeah, well, they did. The other thing you've got to consider is back then, that's when Martinsville had front pits and back pits, and they didn't have the pit lane that looped the whole track. If you remember, they had front pits and back pits, and he was pitting on the front stretch. So it's a much shorter distance to get back on the track than it is today at Martinsville, when you pretty much have to go nearly around the whole track to exit the pit lane. So because you're just going from one end of the straightaway to the other to exit the pit lane. So yeah, I don't think it could be repeated today to do that much work and stay on the lead lap. But again,
let alone beat the 6-minute clock.
Yeah, well, they didn't have a 6-minute clock then either. So, but they weren't working 6 minutes at a time because even under yellow, a lap at Martinsville is pretty short. So, and some of the other guys that you mentioned there, Ricky Rudd, it's another great personality in racing. He was I remember him and Rusty Wallace were when NASCAR first started adding in the road. I know they've always had road racing, but when they added Sonoma and Watkins Glen, it was always either Ricky Rudd or Rusty Wallace that was winning there. Both those guys were considered kings of the road there, and he was and Ricky Rudd didn't he have a record for consecutive starts as well?
Yep.
Yes, he did. He was known as the Iron Man for quite a while. Louise, does he still have that record, or
Jeff Gordon broke it.
Jeff Gordon broke it
at Youden in 2015, the fall Youden race. I know this because they made a diecast of it with the number 793 on the roof, and no, I don't have that one.
Okay, and if I remember correctly, Gordon never failed to qualify for a cup race. I think Ricky Rudd did in his very early days. I know he did in his
yes, he did.
Latest,
Daytona 1976. Yeah. And Darlington 1976. Can you not remember that? Come on.
Rusty Wallace only missed one race his entire career. That was when he flipped at Daytona in '83.
And Ricky Rudd, if I remember correctly, is also one of 2 or 3 drivers that their first career race was in the Cup Series. Granted, he did a little bit of karting here and there, but nothing professional. His first professional race was in the NASCAR Cup Series.
Right, and he was he started in NASCAR kind of very, very young. I want to say he was only 17, or does that sound right?
Yeah, a teenager, 18, right, 19.
Yeah, he was very young when he started because he had he'd amassed a lot of starts and a lot of wins at a relatively young age. It's like when you consider Scott Dixon, and as long as he's been around, and the amount of races he's won, you'd think he'd be a lot older than he is. But he's, Dixon's actually not as old as you think he is.
Yeah, Dixon was he, like 20 when he won in NASCAR for Pac West, something like that?
I think he was 20, yeah, or just a little over 20 because Colton Herta had broken the record for the youngest winner, but he was the running joke was here's the champagne but don't drink it, and then they did the same thing with Colton Herta here at Texas last year. So
yeah, didn't it accidentally gave him one and they didn't realize that?
Oh yeah, his and Newgarden's got switched. They had the sparkling grape juice, whatever, and then his and Newgarden's bottles got switched somehow. And
yeah, somehow.
And then a lot of people wanted to make a big deal about that, and then somebody had to bring up the fact that actually in the state of Texas, right, if you're accompanied by your parent, it's acceptable to have an alcoholic beverage if you're with your parents. And because his dad, Brian Herta, was right there, people said, just stop making a big deal about us, okay? He's actually within the law if he drank champagne. And you know what? It's not like he's sitting at a bar getting wasted. He, sipped some of that and sprayed the rest of it around.
It's just human error in that one. It's just mixed it up. Honestly, you're just trying to find, that's the thing. They're just trying to find something that's not a big deal, to be frank.
Exactly. Yep. Not a big deal. Yeah. So, all right. Who else on this? Now, of the modern era drivers that you mentioned, none of those were Cup champions, were they?
No, other than Kirk Shelmerdine as a Cup crew chief.
As crew chief, yeah.
Which I am glad. Hold on a second. Which I'm glad they put him back in the Hall of Fame ballot, because last year he wasn't on it, because I think if I remember, he had a low amount of votes, kind of like with baseball, where if you have a certain amount of votes that is very low, they just completely take you off the ballot. I'm glad to see that because when you look at crew chiefs, we have Ray Abraham, Dale Inman, to name a few in there. A guy like Kirk Shelmerdine kind of like embodied the 80s, quite frankly, at a time when you had him, Harry Hyde, Jeff Hammond leading the helm in the 1980s. To have somebody represent that decade is ever so essential because when you look at it this way with Kirk, he not only obviously everybody remembers about Dale Earnhardt, but he was also a key contributor of the Flying Aces. Which honestly, if one day that time comes, like we do with basketball, they have the dream team, the whole dream team as a whole class. I say the Flying Aces should be one of the first ones to be recognized as such as a whole hit team.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Now, for me, granted, I'm not gonna joke around. We all know Junior's gonna be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I mean, I don't think there's going to be anybody to vote against him. That being said, I hope that either Mike Stefanik or Larry Phillips go into the Hall of Fame. Stefanik, we've just lost recently in a plane crash. He's the winner of 9 NASCAR championships, and he won 4 of those in the span of 2 years. He won 2 in the modified and 2 in what's now ARCA East. Back then it was Busch North. And then you have Larry Phillips, who, granted, it was more the weekly racing series, the late models, but he has 5 championships in that series and an estimated 1,000 wins.
Yeah, I remember us talking about him on the show at one point in time. So, but yeah, back to your point about Dale Jr. being a first ballot. I was reading some because I always tell you this. I torture myself by reading social media comments. There's a little bit of folks that think he should be in the Hall of Fame, but he shouldn't be a first rounder. And the guy said, he says, I don't think his career was all that memorable. I'm like, you're talking, he's got, 2 consecutive Xfinity, or back then Busch titles, right?
Yes.
15 years in a row as the series' most popular driver, right? 2 Daytona 500.
Yeah.
2 Daytona 500s. He's got, 29 Cup wins and 24 Xfinity wins. And now he's a very, very popular broadcaster. I'm like, what more do you want? I mean, it's career sounds fairly memorable to me. It seemed like all some people remember is the slump. Remember he had a slump for a couple of years. It seemed like that's all some people remember.
To be fair,
his name to an extent, there's always the main complaints from those fans who don't think he's worthy.
To be fair for Dale Jr., if you were to compare his stats with Ricky Rudd, I'm just using another one of the nominees on the same ballot. Jr. actually has the better stats. If you compare him to Jeff Burton, they're about equal playing field, although Junior has 2 Xfinity championships while Burton doesn't have any. The only driver who I would say is comparable, truly comparable, on the ballot this year is Carl Edwards, who has 1 Xfinity championship, 28 Cup wins. But if I remember correctly, I don't think Carl ever won any marquee races, did he?
Southern 500 and the Coke 600 and the Gibbs car.
Okay, so he won 2 marquee races while Dale Jr. won 2 marquee races in the Daytona 500. To me, they're almost identical except for the most popular driver and the fact that Dale Jr., once he stepped out of the car, full time, that Jr. stuck around while Carl didn't.
Yeah, and the other thing the other neat stat about Junior is that 4 consecutive wins at Talladega.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Talladega is such a crapshoot. It's you know what I mean? To dodge the carnage, 4 consecutive races and win. That's an accomplishment. Now, Richard, you're kind of quiet on this Hall of Fame stuff here, so let's have you chime in.
I saw those comments you were talking about, Frank, about his career being underwhelming. I think And there is something to it, you know. The guy was incredibly popular, obviously. You know, he was the poster boy for NASCAR since his dad's passing. But you've got to ask, and then this is, you know, who is he? Is he Dale Earnhardt Jr., the race car driver, or is he Dale Earnhardt Jr., Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s son? You know, why did he win all those NASCAR's most popular driver, like 28 years in a row, or whatever it was? Did he do that because of who he was, or because of who he was related to? And I think,
that's a good point.
He had a very good career. Don't get me wrong, and those numbers stack up pretty well. But at the end of the day, the guy never won a championship. I don't know what was his highest finish in the standings.
I finished second once, didn't he?
Okay, so I mean, he's
maybe
thereabouts.
I think third was his best season. I think on 2 occasions.
Yeah. So I mean, that's good. Jeez, don't get me wrong. But would he have been, for the time that he was, NASCAR's highest paid driver? Would he have been, the guy that brings all the sponsorship in, if it wasn't for his father?
He was third once in 2003. In 2005, he, granted, depending on which fan you talk to, if they bring this up, he was fifth, although he did have that penalty for cursing in Victory Lane at Talladega, which, without that penalty, he may have won.
Right. Yeah. Now, to Richard's point, the interesting thing is that's the question that you can't answer, right? Because if you look at Junior, right, and if you can just disassociate yourself from the fact that his father was a famous race car driver, right, and look at his accomplishments on his own, and look at his personality on its own. I mean, he's a very likable guy. He's a very,
for sure,
very marketable guy. You know what I mean? Would he have been in, the opportunity he was in? Obviously his first Cup ride was in with his dad's team. Would he have had those opportunities? We'll never know. No. Would Michael Andretti have all the kart wins that he has if it weren't for Mario?
Oh yeah, no.
Because Michael was that good on his own.
Yeah.
Without the without the leg up. So, but if you look at Andretti, Michael Andretti as an individual and as a businessman and what he's done, he's incredibly accomplished. He just happens to be Mario Andretti's son, and just like Junior happens to be the son of another of the most well-known race car drivers in the world. So you really can't answer that because you don't know what the world would be for him. But if you look at his merits alone, and I mean just as an individual, as a person, as a very humble human being. You know what I mean? He's just, he's incredibly wealthy, I'm sure, but he acts like a buddy you'd have a beer with and watch a football game. You know what I mean? He's just a regular guy. He's got busted up cars in his backyard and stuff. So I don't know. I'm not a huge fan, but I really like the guy.
Yeah, no, for sure. And he's obviously was never as talented as his father. I don't think that's being disrespectful to say that. And the guy certainly made the most of the talent that he has. And it'd be interesting if in, 30, 40 years time, whatever, when he's sat there with his grandkids and whatever, if it'd be interesting to sort of, and obviously you never get a straight answer to it, but, it'd be interesting to know what he thinks of his career. Does he think that his career was forged by himself or forged by the legacy of his father? I think there's a bit of both, and he certainly took advantage of the situation and made the most of it. So he's got to take a lot of credit there. But be interesting, interesting. I know you'd never know the answer to it, but it's just an interesting thought.
Yeah, it sure is. So now, Seth, you had brought up Jeff Burton.
Yeah,
another one on the ballot. That's the one that surprises me because if you want to talk about a guy whose career was not very memorable, I can't think of. I know he's won several races and contended for championships, but as somebody that's just stood out as one of the top of his game, I mean, for me, I'm never felt that with Jeff Burton. Do you have a different thought on that, or Louise?
Well,
The thing about Burton is that I think it's more or less from the ambassador standpoint, and that's something I wanted to bring up about Dale Jr. He's been like a massive ambassador to the sport, not just in the stock car realm, but also just the history aspect, and also the sim racing. We're talking about it. And before him, it was Bobby Labonte, which I definitely learned that recently, that Bobby Labonte was one of the first advocates for sim racing until Dale Jr. kind of made it more bigger than it is, and more than ever right now, to say the least. Well, with Burton, I think it's more or less that he was kind of like one of the leaders from the driver's aspect, like to an extent, like he kind of like carried the torch to an extent that Dale left behind. He and Rusty Wallace, as far as being the guy that would talk about the sport, defend it at all costs. But other than that, that's as far as I can go about him.
well, just to add to what Louise was saying as far as being an ambassador to the sport, I would say the same for Junior that Louise did. For Burton, I would add, similar to Junior, he also was one of the first to take a step into the iRacing deal last year, while Junior did it back in 2010 himself as a driver and then later on as a team owner on iRacing. Jeff Burton last year teamed with Parker Klingerman to have their own iRacing team in the NASCAR Coca-Cola iRacing series, and they were essentially one of the first new teams to embrace the idea. They were followed by real life teams like Joe Gibbs Racing, Roush Fenway Racing, JTG Doherty, Wood Brothers, Stuart Haas, but they're basically leading the charge to a certain point when it comes to certain areas of the sport. So in that aspect, I can see Burton being on the modern era ballot. That being said, is he worthy of the Hall of Fame this year in comparison to the others on the modern era ballot? I don't know.
Okay, but I will reiterate that I think all his contributions to iRacing are beside the point. It's not the iRacing Hall of Fame.
I'm not.
I think you guys are just
way.
so starved for real racing that you talk about your iRacing all the time. So
Okay, I'll be honest with you. I can't even do iRacing because I don't have the best laptop or the video card for it. I'm basically covering that kind of stuff because obviously it's the thing going on right now, and also just keeps me active. But once we get back to the real world, time will tell if of course I'll still follow it then and there. It's just a matter of between Burton and Dale Jr., who contributed a lot more from the virtual aspect. I think obviously you got to think Dale Jr. because look at Denny Hamlin. He got noticed by that from Dale Jr. Look where he is right now with 500 wins and probably now arguably the best driver on the grid without a championship that is going on right now.
This is true. So, all right. Well, we've only got a couple of minutes left. So, are there any other stories out there that we haven't touched on that anybody wants to mention or bring up?
A little bit going around in Formula One where apparently Aston Martin are trying to lure Toto away from Mercedes. Obviously with Papa Stroll, Lawrence Stroll, bailing out Aston Martin, and Force India or Racing Point or whatever they are now will be known as Aston Martin F1 next year. There just rumours that they're trying to lure Toto away from Mercedes and make him actually the CEO of Aston Martin overall. So that's done wonders for their share price.
Yeah, there have been rumors floating that Mercedes might be getting out of Formula One. You know what I mean? I don't know.
I don't. I mean, if it would, it'd be a massive shock. I mean, they're just surely getting a return with Lewis is a reasonably outside of Formula One anyway, reasonably likable guy, and everything looks pretty good, and they sell. So I'd be amazed if anything like that happened. But yeah, I mean, apparently they're trying to poach Toto, and that's obviously had a huge benefit to their share price this week. But then they declined it, and now their share price has tanked. So who knows? But there's obviously
so there you go. Yeah.
little bits and pieces going on.
All right, so what do we have on deck this weekend? Indy cars that are racing at Virtual Michigan with Dale Jr. in the mix. Where is the NASCAR Virtual World?
NASCAR is off this weekend because it's Easter on Sunday.
Ah, yes, it is.
But there are other races this weekend. You have the iRX, or the iRacing Rallycross, presented by Subaru, which will have Travis Pastrana. There you have 2 NASCAR drivers that are participating in that. Greg Biffle and Greg Biffle and Ryan Truex. They also have some IndyCar drivers, Connor Daly, Alexander Rossi. There's a short course truck series iRacing deal on Saturday night after the IndyCar race that also has Rossi and Connor Daly and Biffle, for that matter. Also on Friday night at 8 p.m., there is going to be an iRacing series sponsored by Kicking the Tires that I will be running in, funny enough. It's being hosted by Ryan Ellis from the NASCAR Xfinity Series and PR for Go Fast Racing. And there will be several other NASCAR drivers, Cody Ware, Bailey Curry, Joey Gase, some other media members, Toby Christie, and that should be interesting, and hopefully I don't embarrass myself.
Yeah, well, good luck with that, Seth. Yeah, I might have to tune in and watch that one. So, that being said, we are out of time. So I want to thank you, Richard, Seth, and Louise. I want to thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network and thank iHeartRadio and Spreaker and Google Podcasts, all those folks that carry us. And I want to thank all you folks that tune in and listen to us. And until next week, good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com.
Enter website, enter website, enter website, enter website.